A few years ago, I created a retrospective that celebrated one of Ireland's most acclaimed modern music acts, Celtic Woman. In a little over 15 years, that group has started the careers of several talented female singers and reintroduced the magic of Irish music to mainstream audiences all over the world. Today, I'm going to celebrate a different female of the Irish music industry. Before I became obsessed with Celtic Woman, a private yet ambitious singer made me a fan of the new age music genre for life, and her work has won the hearts of millions since she became a sensation over 30 years ago. Her name is Enya Padraigan ní Brennan, or as she is more commonly known, Enya. This talent unexpectedly rose to stardom and became a celebrated inspiration to music artists everywhere. Her unique style comes from her creativity, a lot of patience, and her collaboration with longtime partners Nicky and Roma Ryan. Even when critics haven't always been kind to her, the overwhelming success of her album sales are enough to show how enormous her fanbase has become and how many lives she has touched. Indeed, her career has been something of an ordinary miracle with an extraordinary history. Now let's go back over 40 years ago to the beginning of this prodigy's story. Our story begins in County Donegal, located in the northwest of Ireland. Within the middle of the county lies the historic community of Gweedore. It is the home of Mount Errigal, the highest mountain in the county. Life in the region is very much centered around the old country ways, with the local people taking part in some traditional activities that tie them to ancient Irish culture, including the speaking and singing in the ancient Gaelic language. Today, it is the largest Irish language-speaking community in the country. Among the residents who loved music were a married couple known as Leo and Marie Brennan. Leo was the leader of an Irish show band group called the Slieve Foy Band, which performed for weddings and other special occasions. Marie was an amateur vocalist in the band and worked as a music teacher at the Gweedore Community School. In 1968, Leo opened up Leo's Tavern in Meenalek. The pub is still open today and holds evening music performances frequently. Leo and Marie would become the proud parents of 9 children, 4 boys and 5 girls, and naturally, the couple passed their interest in music onto their offspring. In the evening, the family would get together to listen to the radio and sing ballads for hours. Every year, Marie would get her children involved in the singing competitions at the annual Festival of Music, known as the Feshcaúil in Irish. The children would also get involved in special performances aimed at children, known as pantomimes, at the Gweedore Theatre. They also sang in their mother's choir at St. Mary's Church in Derrybig, where Marie played the organ. Yes, music was a very big part of the Brennan family's life, but the one who was impacted by it the most was the 4th youngest, born on May 17, 1961, Enya Padraigan ní Brennan. At the age of 3, Enya appeared on stage for the first time, starring as Little Red Riding Hood in a pantomime featuring several fairy tale figures. Soon afterward, she joined her family in the singing competitions as well as her mother's church choir. Enya came to really enjoy music because it unlocked her imagination and inspired her to take on new activities in her somewhat quiet life. When Enya turned 4, she began to learn piano, and from that point on, she was fully devoted to her music. However, this devotion came with some consequences. Although her family members were very loyal with one another, Enya constantly had to fight to be noticed amongst a group of 11. Her father was away most of the time touring with his band, and her older siblings didn't interact with her much. Enya felt closer to her mother and her younger siblings. Also, in Gweedore, there aren't really any neighborhoods. Very few people live within close distance of one another. Outside of school, Enya didn't really have too many other people to socialize with. In fact, after school got out for the day, she would have to travel to a neighboring town in order to have her piano lessons. Regardless of the struggles though, Enya enjoyed her quiet yet busy musical life, and sometimes preferred to be alone anyway. She believes this has helped her become the independent individual she's grown up to be. When Enya turned 11, her parents had already been paying for their older children to attend boarding school, so the next big stage of the music prodigy's life began when her grandparents provided the money for her to attend a convent school in Milford, run by nuns of the Sisters of Loretto Order. Although leaving her family was initially frightening, Enya would simply place her trust in God to get her through this new phase. Luckily, this faith would help her transition quickly, and as a student, she developed an interest in Latin, watercolor painting, and classical music, all of which would come to influence her work in the future. She remained a student there until she was 17, when she would next go to Loretto College in Milford to study classical music under private tuition. Now, despite where she is today, Enya never intended, nor really wanted, to be a successful musician. She just wanted to be a music teacher, much like her mother. This wasn't the case with some of her older siblings, though. Along with their twin uncles, Noel and Padraig O'Dugain, Enya's older brothers, Paul and Kieran, and older sister Moya, formed the folk rock band Clannad in 1973. The band started off performing at Leo's Tavern, before going on to tour internationally. Along with performing their own original songs, the band specialized in performing traditional Irish ballads in their own modern contemporary style. Throughout the 1970s, they released 3 solo albums and a live album. Starting in 1975, Clannad was managed by Nicky Ryan, a former full-time carpenter at St. Mary's School for the Deaf in Dublin. Ever since his childhood, Nicky had an enthusiastic interest in all kinds of sounds. Working at the school reignited his interest in the field, and thus he became a sound engineer. Additional management and administrative duties were handled by Roma, Nicky's wife of Belfast origin, whom he met while working as a sound mixer for the Irish folk band Planxty. Nicky was proud of what the band accomplished in making music in the Irish language, but by the end of the 70s, he felt the band needed something new, and that was when Moya introduced him to her younger sister. Nicky thought Enya might just be the ideal ingredient for Clannad, so he invited her to join the band to play the synthesizer and provide backup vocals. After 1 year at college, she accepted the invitation and became a member, touring with her siblings across Europe and being featured on the albums Cranul and Fuam, though she is uncredited on the former album. Although Enya has always considered herself loyal to her family, things didn't always work out while performing with them. She often felt left out, as though she were a minor detail in a painting that was all about her siblings and uncles. For one thing, Enya wasn't really into the folk music of her country, which the band specialized in playing. Also, at the age of 18, Enya was the youngest member of the group by 9 years, so there was a big age gap. Plus, having been away 8 years at school, Enya had trouble getting used to working with siblings she had spent little time with. Most importantly, perhaps, Enya was undoubtedly an independent performer who felt that she would never become a full-time member of the band. Moya even understood how her sister felt. I suppose it had always been difficult for Enya. We loved what she brought to the band, but it was hard for her to infiltrate our years as a tightly knit nucleus. As sisters, we had always been close and talked about everything together, so I was sorry when band business caused a strain between us. Nicky was also beginning to have problems with the band by the start of the 80s. For one thing, he was very unimpressed with the lack of professionalism some members were showing off the stage with their drinking habits. However, he was even more frustrated with the band's reluctance to try anything new with their music. He brought Enya into the group with hopes that it could lead to some new possibilities, but the band simply continued to keep her in the back. They wouldn't even give her fair pay. Finally, in 1982, after a band meeting during a concert in Geneva, Nicky and Roma decided to part from the group. As for Enya, her brother Paul told her that she could stay with the band and be a star, or she could go with the Ryans and be a nobody. When Enya made up her mind, she willingly chose the Ryans. Despite all the tensions, Enya has continued to keep in touch with her siblings and remains loyal to her family. As for Nicky, leaving Clannad created a true rift, even though he had worked with the band for 8 years. More than 30 years after the split, he has never since been in touch with any of the members. So did the trio make the right choice in taking a separate path? Well, every new endeavor has a small beginning, and this new group began with almost nothing. After leaving Clannad, Enya had to decide whether to return to Gwydir or live with Nikki and Roma in their little home in the Dublin suburb of Artane. Although her family was opposed to her living with the Ryans, Enya appreciated the support of her two friends and loved working with them. She accepted the Ryans' offer, and the three of them would take baby steps to see where their work would take them. They officially became a 3-member musical partnership, and they have worked together now for almost 40 years. Enya now had a place to live, but she didn't really have much to work with except a single piano in a studio that was really just a shed in the backyard. Despite such limitations, though, Enya's dedication to her art was relentless, and she spent the next 2 years practicing classical pieces on piano, recording herself, and listening to the recordings. After repeating this process for a while, she would improvise while playing the piano and would start writing and arranging her own music. Possibilities eventually began to come about, with Enya being offered the chance to play the synthesizer on Mairead Ní Mhaoine and Frankie Kennedy's 1983 album Ceol Adúaid, which Nikki produced. That same year, Enya made her first solo appearance on live television for the RTE program Festival Folk, but she was so nervous that she spent the whole gig hiding behind her piano. The following year, 2 of her piano recordings, An Goé an Grihan, or The Solar Wind, and Miss Claire Remembers, were included on the 1984 compilation cassette Touch Travel. After working with Enya for 2 years, Roma saw a new possibility for her friend. While she would listen to Enya's work, Roma would visualize various images, and thought the music could possibly work for movie and television soundtracks. Roma would send out demo tapes featuring up to 6 or 7 of Enya's piano pieces to various film producers, and the music caught the attention of British producer David Putnam. Putnam would offer Enya a job to write music for the upcoming British romantic comedy, The Frog Prince, for which Putnam was the executive producer. Although writing music for a movie felt intimidating at first to Enya, she took the offer with growing confidence. Together, Enya, Nikki, and Roma set up a recording facility in their Artane home, which they would call Egla Studios, French for eagle. Enya wrote and recorded 9 pieces for the film, and the soundtrack would be released along with the movie in 1985. It would be the first ever commercial release to credit her with the trademark spelling of her name instead of the traditional Irish spelling. That same year, Enya would be featured as a vocalist on 3 tracks of Christy Moore's Ordinary Man, a studio album for which Nikki was a sound engineer. Finally, it seemed the star-to-be had gotten her foot in the right door. Unfortunately, the results of the experience weren't very promising. The music Enya wrote would be orchestrated against her wishes by producer Richard Murrell, and while the songs titled The Frog Prince and Dreams were included on the soundtrack album, they weren't featured in the final film. Although Enya considered her work on the soundtrack a good career move, she remembers it today as a disappointing one, as she, Nikki, and Roma felt in the end as if they were hardly a part of it. And so, the Frog Prince failed to really do anything for Enya and her partners. What were they going to do next? Well, it just so happened that around the same time Enya started to make her own music, the British Broadcasting Corporation, better known as the BBC, was hard at work on an upcoming 6-part documentary miniseries. The Celts, a series that explored the history and growth of Celtic culture and lifestyle throughout Europe for more than 2,000 years. This show was originally going to feature the music of a different composer in each of its 6 parts. When the time came to finally put the episodes together, the team behind the show reviewed several submissions, but just weren't impressed with what they heard. BBC producer Tony McCauley reached out to the music trio and asked if they'd be interested in submitting some music. In response, they sent him a recording of a piece they wrote called March of the Celts. Macaulay then passed the demo on to director David Richardson, and the solution to the show's music predicament was found. The Celts team decided that Enya's music would not just be perfect for one episode, but for the entire series, a grand total of 72 minutes worth of Enya's music. Enya had received her first ever major solo project. The music was initially composed and recorded at Egla Studios, and later at the original location for BBC Enterprises in Wood Lane, London. Some tracks were written around famous figures of Celtic mythology, such as Fairy Tale, which was based on the love affair of the fairy king Midar and Princess Etain, and Triad, which is a three-part piece dedicated to St. Patrick, the patron saint of Ireland, Cuchulainn, the warrior demigod, and Uiscin, the legendary poet. Other tracks were inspired by famous legends, such as The Sun and the Stream, which was based on the story of Finn McCool and the Salmon of Knowledge, Dara an Tua, which is about the Celts' belief in the magic of both the sun and the moon, and Dan a Dŵr, which served as a tribute to the submerged village of Capel Cullen in Wales. Most of the music tracks would be used more than once throughout the series. One track which would hold some significance for Enya in the future, and which we will hear more about later on, was Boadicea. This track focused on Boudica, the queen of the Iceni tribe of Britain in the 1st century AD. Boudica led a rebellion against the Roman Empire in the year 60 or 61 AD, and was captured by the enemy, only to escape their control by poisoning herself. By the 1800s, she would become a famous hero of British history. Speaking of Boudica, David Richardson also wanted a song specifically about someone becoming spellbound by her presence, which would become the track I Want Tomorrow. This song was featured at the end of the 4th episode, The Open-Ended Curve, and featured Enya on screen. The clip has become particularly infamous for featuring Enya doing one of the wackiest things she has ever done in one of her videos. Yep, she just magically set a car on fire. The second time Enya would appear on screen in the show was for the piece Aldebaran, which is Arabic for the follower, and named after the brightest star in the constellation of Taurus. This track was featured in the last episode, The Legacy, and it is dedicated to then up-and-coming British film director Ridley Scott, who had recently released Blade Runner, one of Roma Ryan's favorite movies. A soundtrack with the music was released by BBC Records 2 months before the show premiered in March 1987, under the title Enya. Sadly, because Enya was still unknown among mainstream audiences, the album was not much of a seller. It only reached 69th place on the UK Albums Chart and 8th place in the Irish Albums Chart. It didn't help that critics gave the album mostly mixed to negative reviews. The good news was that the show introduced its viewers to Enya, and her image was slowly starting to grow. Although her work with the Celts was more personally satisfying than her efforts with the Frog Prince, it just wasn't enough to put Enya on the map. But some hope would arrive thanks to the then chairman of Warner Music UK, Rob Dickens. Enya was invited to the 1987 Irish Recorded Music Association Awards, for which she had written some music. Because she had nowhere to sit during the dinner portion of the ceremony, Dickens invited her to join the WEA group, which consisted of people from Warner Bros. Records, Elektra Records, and Atlantic Records. It was at that moment that Dickens revealed his obsession with Enya's music. He would listen to his copy of the Celts soundtrack every night before bed. He even had gotten most of his work colleagues enthusiastic about the music. Dickens wanted Enya to become a musical sensation, but not only so that Warner Music could make money. He wanted Enya to create more beautiful music. He offered Enya a contract to join Warner Records for £75,000, and she agreed to sign under the definite condition that she, Nikki, and Roma would be left alone while making their music. She had 3 specific conditions. 1. They would all be given complete artistic freedom. 2. There would be minimal to no manager interference. 3. In order to accommodate the slow process that Enya's work would require, there would be no deadlines to finish the albums. The albums would not be put out until Enya, Nikki, and Roma felt for certain that everything was ready. Dickens willingly agreed to the conditions, and the trio was now officially a part of Warner Records UK. While some people at the company were excited, others felt doubtful. The skeptics thought that Dickens was taking a big risk on an unknown musician, while rival companies were seeking out talent closer in style to more prominent artists like U2, such as REM and the Cranberries. Because Dickens was the boss, though, he got what he wanted, and so did the company's newest members when they were given the green light to work on music for their first Warner Records album, Watermark. Work on the album began in June 1987, starting at Egla Studios, where the music would be recorded in demo form. With the money provided by Warner Records, Enya and Nikki were able to purchase new equipment and upgrade Egla Studios. This included 7 new keyboards and synthesizers for Enya to compose with. Enya kept a generally low profile and avoided the press while in the process of making her music. She also wouldn't listen to another artist's work, and never put the radio on to listen to the most popular songs. Enya never wants to copy someone else. She always wants the inspirations to come naturally to her. This trait has remained a part of her work ethic to this day. After all the music for Watermark was all written, the trio would go to re-record and digitally remaster it at a more cutting-edge studio. Nikki arranged for this at Orinoco Studios, now known as Miloko Studios, in the Bermondsey district of London, where the team would be assisted in engineering and mixing by composer Ross Coulomb. Since the quality of the vocals on the demo tracks had dwindled significantly, Enya and Nikki had no choice but to re-record all of her vocals. How hard could that be? If you're not familiar with how this music is made, then you'd be surprised. What you hear in the recordings is actually not just Enya's voice. It's her voice multiplied by 2, 3, sometimes 400. One thing that got Nikki interested in working with Enya was an interest they both shared in vocal harmonies. Over time, they both developed a technique of multi-vocals, which would become a trademark style for Enya. A whole section of singing could contain over 400 recordings of Enya's voice. Enya believes that it's very important for an artist to have their own distinct voice, and that the multi-vocal technique gives her music a warm yet uniform feeling and tone. The album gets its title from the opening instrumental piece, which was inspired by a poem Roma had written at the time. This track is notable for being a personal favorite of the late Princess Diana, and it would later be included on the Princess Diana tribute soundtrack released in 1997. 3 of the 11 tracks were instrumentals Enya wrote and composed herself, while the remaining 8 tracks were songs sung in Irish, Latin, and English. Another trademark aspect of Enya's performance style is her use of multiple languages on each album. The choice of language for a track is based on which one Enya and Roma think suits the song best. Some of the music was inspired by Enya's childhood days in Gweedore and historic landmarks. For example, the piece On Your Shore was inspired by a beach near Enya's childhood home, which her family would visit every summer. Her grandparents were later buried at the nearby Mohara de Fohan graveyard. Originally, there were no plans to make singles from any of the songs on Watermark, but Enya and Nikki changed their minds after Rob Dickens jokingly requested for the album to have one. A week after he submitted this request, Nikki called to tell him, "We got a single." Eventually, 4 of Watermark's songs would become singles at different times. These songs were Evening Falls, Storms in Africa, Exile, and what might just be the most important song of Enya's career, Orinoco Flow. Of all the songs on Watermark, Orinoco Flow was the one that required the most time to write, arrange, and perform. It was the last track to be completed, and it all originated from a pizzicato sound Enya had been practicing, which Nicky thought could be made into a whole song. Roma thought the song should be about someone sailing all over the world, which led to references to various locations, as well as the song's trademark multi-voiced chorus. The rhythm of the music reminded Nicky of a children's skipping song, so he thought it would be a nice touch if the song's location references rhymed with one another, thus the phrases such as from Bali to Cali and Peru to Cebu. Some of Roma's inspiration for the words came from watching her two daughters, Ebony and Persia, skipping outside their home one day. The original version of the song would feature the iconic sail away lyric after every single line. This drove Dickens crazy when he first heard the song, so he politely suggested that Enya and Nicky fix this. Speaking of Dickens, it might surprise you to know that he didn't know his name, along with Ross Coulomb, was referenced in the song's lyrics until after the album was printed. Though it initially embarrassed him, he came to appreciate it, and he claims that he can't help but smile every time he hears that line. Enya and her team completed the recording process in April 1988. Enya really enjoyed working on Watermark so much that she hardly had a thought about how well the album would do, especially since her music was so different from what was usually played on radio stations. Following a private album launch reception at the Serpentine Gallery in Hyde Park, London, the album was officially released in the United Kingdom on September 19, 1988. It was an unexpected critical and commercial success. Watermark received glowing praise from critics, with many pointing out how they liked the delicate and lush, yet not too romanticized tone of the music. The multivocal sound technique was also welcomed warmly, as it didn't only sound like something new and original, it sounded like music of a whole new genre that was all Enya's creation. By October 5th, 1988, the album made it to number 5 on the UK Albums Chart. 4 months after its release, 500,000 copies of the album had been sold in both Ireland and the United Kingdom. Following its American debut through Geffen Records on January 10th, 1989, Watermark got second place on the Billboard New Age music charts, and would remain on the list for 286 weeks. It also debuted on the Billboard 200 the week of February 4th, 1989, at 100th place, and would move up to 25th place within 39 weeks on the list. Enya even won the Best Female Singer Award at the 1989 Irish Recorded Music Association Awards. But just as successful as the album was the song Orinoco Flow. After it was released as a single in October 1988, over 250,000 copies of the song had been sold, and it received a silver certification from the British phonographic industry. The song also became a big hit in America after landing a lot of airplay on progressive rock, new age, and top 40 format radio stations. The song was also nominated for a Best New Age Recording and Best Music Video Award at the 1990 Grammy Awards, but it lost both to Peter Gabriel's Passion Music for the Last Temptation of Christ and Michael Jackson's Leave Me Alone. When the song was released to the public, Rob Dickens would also make a suggestion regarding the title. He suggested that future pressings would change the title of the song to Orinoco Flow, Sail Away, in part because fans and shoppers would incorrectly refer to the song as, well, Sail Away. A music video for the song was directed by Michael G. Hagan, who teamed up with 5 different artists to combine real footage of Enya, shot against a blue screen, with hand-painted animation and backgrounds inspired by the album's artwork. G. Hagan would also direct the videos for the album's other singles. Evening Falls would be released as a single in December 1988, and would reach number 3 in Ireland and number 20 in the United Kingdom. Storms in Africa would be released the following year in June 1989, and unlike the Irish-language version on Watermark, the song would be re-recorded with English lyrics and renamed Storms in Africa Part 2. It reached number 12 in Ireland and number 4 in the United Kingdom. Exile would then become a single in 1991 after being featured on the soundtracks for the movies Green Card and LA Story. 5 years after its release, Watermark received a quadruple platinum certification from the BPI for shipment of over 1,200,000 copies, and 7 years after its release, the album received the same honor from the Recording Industry Association of America for shipment of 4 million copies. Today, over 8 million copies of Watermark have been sold. To quote Enya from a 2000 interview with Barnes & Noble, looking back on Watermark, the words are those of loss, of reflection, of exile, not necessarily from one's country, but from those whom the heart loves. It has in its theme searching, longing, of reaching out for an answer. The ocean is a central image. It is the symbolism of a great journey, which is the way I would describe this album. One could say that Watermark was just the start of a journey for Enya and her creative team that began on an ocean with endless possibilities for adventure. We've only just begun our journey into the history of an amazing talent, so be sure to stay tuned for the next part of this retrospective. See you next time.
What would you like people to think Ireland is like?
Generally, they should see Irish people as very open and warm people and very happy. And all these other stories, they should really try and forget them.